Hello, web design students. Now let's do some coding. Welcome to code. Is this life-changing? Am I changing your life? Yes. Why? Because you will be able to say that I have experience with HTML and CSS. You put this on your resume. So let's do some. But before we do some, we need to pick a text editor. Now the three I have listed here, Atom, Brackets, and Sublime Text, are free, and I've used them all before, and they're great. We're going to use Atom for these demos. So if you don't already have a text editor like this, feel free to download Atom, come back to this video, and we'll proceed. There are other options, including Dreamweaver, which you may already have, TextEdit, for those of you on Macs, you have TextEdit, and something else called BB Edit. I don't use these. Dreamweaver is fine if it's the only thing you have. The other ones, these here, Atom, Brackets, and Sublime Text, are free. So those are great options. But if you feel like you need to use Dreamweaver, it's fine. I don't personally like Dreamweaver. It's a little clunky. There's almost too many features in it. So feel free to use it if you like, but I'm going to stick with Atom and we're going to use the demos. When I'm writing code, I'll be using Atom. Let's talk about content. So we go back to last week's wireframe that I had prepared. Here it is. And then the mock-up that I did last week, here it is. What we're going to do is break up these pieces into boxes or blocks and then start building a website. Now, it's not going to look like this after this week. We'll start to build the pieces. So here's a side-by-side comparison of the wireframe and my mock-up. And you can see generally that these things can be broken up into boxes. So we're going to be drawing a lot of boxes here. So if you open a zip file that's in Canvas, I'll start to go through a demo of coding and how to use Atom and how to build your first piece of the website. So now that you've downloaded the zip file from Canvas, let's take a minute to talk about files and folder structure. Typically, a web hosting service will put your public-facing files in a folder called public_HTML. So I've set it up the same way, so you can get used to it. Underneath or inside the public_HTML folder is a CSS folder where our style files will go, an IMG folder where our images will go, and a JS folder where any extra JavaScript files will go. Also, we have an index.html file. We'll talk about that in a second. Here's some web hosting that I have, and all the files that are on my public-facing website are in the public_HTML folder. So all of these have some public-facing page on my website. So here is my index file here, and here is what it looks like on my website. Let's talk about the index.html file. This is where the action is. So the vast majority of websites out there, the home page for that website is something called index.html. Sometimes it's PHP, but it will be called index. And as the browser will go, if you go to, say, espn.com, then that home page you see is some variation of index file. So we're going to use an index file in our site to start building our home page. So once you've opened Atom, you'll get this welcome guide opening up. Now, once you get more experience in HTML and CSS and coding, you may wind up using some of these features here, but we're going to skip these for now. We're actually going to close all of these windows or these tabs and start fresh. So I'm going to close these for now. This is something called telemetry consent. You can select either one. I usually just close it. And then from here, you want to go to File, open. Now I like to go to where my public underscore HTML folder is so that I'll get a view of the files while I'm working on them like this. So go right to public underscore HTML, just select the folder itself and click open so that you get this project pane over here. And you can see the folder structure, same as I showed you in the whiteboard earlier. So we can start working here. So like I said, index.html is where all the action is, and we'll open this one. So click on this one. And I've already started it with something called a doc type HTML. This is what tells the browser that we're using HTML5 and that to expect to be using HTML5 tags. So the next thing I'll do is start coding. So if you go to Atom and get to here, the next thing you want to do is start typing some tags. So the first tag we want is the HTML tag itself because we're working HTML. So this is what's called an opening tag. And then we want to use the closing tag as well because when you open something, you got to close it. So let's start with the basic. First one is HTML. The next one, we want to make the head. And we want to close the head. So we'll start to put some code inside the head here. And what's a head without a body? So we'll put the body opening and closing tags here. I'll make some space. We're gonna have a lot of stuff in this body here and a lot of stuff in this head. So we can start with that. The next thing we need to do is put a title. Let's just call this example website for now. Again, opening tag here, left arrow bracket, whatever the tag is, right arrow bracket, and then on the other side, left arrow slash tag, right arrow. Next thing we want to put in here is meta. Actually, it's meta character set, like so. And you'll see here, we have a lot of options here. I'm going to pick UTF-8. That's all we need to do here. We don't need to close this meta tag here. There are a few instances where you don't close the tag. This is one of them. So meta is one. And then we can skip ahead down into the body. So remember when I said that HTML5 was semantic? That is to say, it uses words and the words mean what they say. Now we're going to start putting in some of those HTML5 tags. So the first one we're going to use is something called header. And we're going to close this. If you think back to our wireframe, then it has several boxes. And so we're going to start building those boxes now. What we're going to do is use something called a div. Close this div. And this is short for division. And this is how we split up the wireframe or the mockup into different boxes. So right now we've got a header one, and this is where the navigation is going to go inside this header. Then we have a series of divs, but right now let's just write div here. We actually have 3 divs, but I'll explain in a second that we can use divs. We can use something called footer, which is a special kind of div. That's going to go at the very bottom before the end of the body. And then here, we're going to have multiple divs. So let's just go here, start building them. Now, the number of divs that you have will depend on the number of blocks of information that you have. If we go back to our mockup, let's count the number of blocks that we have, or boxes. So we have this box here with what looks like navigation. We have a box here that has this picture of me and another box inside of it. Let's just count this one box here. Here we have a big box that has some stuff inside of it. Let's call this one box here. And then we've got another box here with another picture and this newsletter sign up thing. And then we have one more box at the bottom, and that has some stuff in it, some text. We'll put that text in later. But for now, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes. Let's go back to our code and see how many boxes that we have, or divs. So we've got a header, that's one div, a second div, a third div, fourth div, and then the footer. Footer again is a type of div, and a header is a type of div, like a specialized kind of div. So we have the proper number of divs that match up with our mockup. Now that we have our very basic structure in place, we can start to add things. So let's go to, in our mockup below the first part that has a navigation, let's put the navigation in here in the header. Let's skip that for now. Let's assume this goes here. I'll just write a little comment using left arrow, exclamation point, 2 dashes, navigation will go here, and then 2 dashes and a right arrow. This is something called a HTML comment. This is not code that will show up on a web page, but you can leave notes to yourself using this left arrow, exclamation mark, 2 dashes, and then at the other end, 2 dashes and a right arrow. So here's a comment. So the navigation will go here. I'll come back to that next week, but for now, let's skip down to the next div. The next div is where the picture of me was that had the big kind of title. Let's call it this div here. So in order to tell these divs apart, we can do something called adding a class to it, and you add a class like this. Maybe I want to call this the about section because that's where my pickup. Maybe we want to call this about class because it had that picture of me and sort of had a description of me. So we can differentiate different divs using class. This is class about. And if you go back to my mockup, the next div underneath it had those pictures of projects and some text. So we can go here and call this div class projects. So now that we know that this div is for the about stuff and this div is for our project stuff. Now, if you remember in my mockup, underneath the projects was another box that had newsletter sign up. So I'll call this, whoops, class newsletter. You notice when you type in class inside the bracket, so you have the class part between the div and the right arrow, that's where class goes. And if you start to write a class inside these brackets, it'll fill it out for you. And it'll also fill out the equal sign and double quotation marks that your class goes into. So the nice thing about Atom and brackets and Sublime Text is that they autocomplete this stuff like the equal sign and the double quotes. So footer here, let's just call it hello. Let's go back to our about div. So I'm going to start calling this the about div because I put the class on it called about. So this is my about div. In my mockup, I had a picture and I had some extra text. And so let's add that text. So right here, let's call this H1. This is a heading. So you will see that we'll have multiple headings. So the biggest one is called H1. And in my mockup, I had media, if I can spell, designer, and content producer. Make sure to close your H1 tag. Again, left arrow, / whatever tag it is, and then a right arrow, and then under that H1, I had another set of text. It was just lorem ipsum for now, but we'll add some extra stuff to it. The nice thing about Atom is that it'll fill in some lorem ipsum for you. So you just click here once it starts to auto-complete it. You get all this lorem ipsum, which brings me to something else that Atom will do. This is a really long line, and this is kind of a pain to have to scroll through. So if you happen to get this in your Atom window, you can go to View, toggle Soft Wrap, and then it'll bring it all into one screen width here. So this is good. I don't need all of this. Let's just delete some of this here so that I get to here, and then make sure I do a closing H2 tag right here. So let's sum up. I've got my about div here. If you go back to my mockup, you'll see that I had a big set of text here called Multimedia Designer Content Producer, and then I had some lorem ipsum underneath it. We used the H2 for this here. That's good. For now, we'll leave it like this. And again, at the end of this video, it's not going to look like my mockup yet, but we're still building some pieces into this. So this is where we're at for the about div. So at this point, we can take a look in our browser and see what this looks like. So let's go to the browser. So I'll go to Chrome, open file, navigate to the file, open our index.html file, and here it is. Right now, it doesn't look like much, but we'll start to add some more things to this. So let's go back to Atom. So next thing we can add, go down to projects. If you think back to our mockup, then we have some pictures and some text in this projects div. Let's start by splitting this into smaller boxes. So what we can do is go into the projects div and start to add something called a section. This is another kind of special div that is semantic. It's the word that says what it means. It's a section. And inside this section, I want to add an image. Whoops, img. Let's for now put an image. And then we're also going to have, maybe we'll do an H3 because we've already done H1 and H2. Here's an H3. In my mockup, it said illustration. Celebrate Princeton Innovation 2018 cover. Don't forget to close the H3 tag. Underneath the heading, the H3, maybe we'll have a little bit of paragraph text here. We'll do some lorem ipsum again. Whoops. Don't forget to close our paragraph tag here. And what we'll do is add a link. So in order to add like a link you can click on, that's all it is for now. Let's start with that. We'll come back to that in a second. So now we have image here, H3, and we put some stuff here, and then a paragraph. And then here we have an A, we have to finish making that link. But right now, let's go to IMG. This is where we put the picture in. So in IMG, we go into the bracket itself, and between the G of IMG and the right arrow bracket, we're going to make a space and then start to put the necessary code in here. And so Atom can anticipate what we're doing, and what we want is this something called SRC, short for source. So you can either type SRC or click SRC. It'll give you the equal sign and double quotes. And what we're going to do is point to a file inside of the IMG folder. I'll show you what the IMG folder looks like. If you go over to the project pane over here, click the arrow, and we want the CPI 2018 JPEG. So here we need to put the name of the folder, which is IMG, and then we have to write the name out, TPI 2018.jpg. And then before we finish with the IMG, between the quotes here and the right arrow, one more space, and then we get back to these options. What we want is Alt, and then we can describe what the image is here for people using screen readers or have low visibility or some other visual impairment. Let's call this Cellrate Princeton Innovation Brochure Cover. Again, this is descriptive text for people that won't be able to see what the actual image is. So you want to do that as a matter of course each time you put in an image. So we can save this, go back to our browser, and see what it looks like. Now that we've gone back to our browser, we can refresh, and then we should have a picture and some text. And we do. So let's review. We had an H1, which is the big text here, an H2, which is also big, but not quite as big as H1. And then we've got an image that we put in, and then an H3, which is big, but not quite as big as H2 or H1, and then some paragraph text underneath here. So one more thing we'll add is that link that we've had started after the paragraph. So let's go back to Atom. So now we're back into this section. We want to go in between A and the right arrow bracket. Now for our options, we have href and some other things. Let's go with href. This is called a hypertext reference. It also gives you the equal sign and the double quotes. And we don't actually have the link yet, but as a placeholder, we can put # or hashtag if you want to call it a hashtag. Or if you want to really impress your friends, know that this is actually called an octothorpe. So we put an octothorpe right in here. And then we need the actual thing you're going to click on. So the text that you would click on here, so let's just call it link goes here. And then we have to close this A tag here. And so this makes a link that you can click on. Here would have gone the URL to wherever you wanted to go. But since we don't have anything yet, we'll keep that as an octothorpe or a hashtag or a #. One thing I forgot was to close this section tag. Whoops. One thing I forgot to do was close this section tag. So underneath here, we're going to put section like so. Now a section you can use as a special kind of div, or you can use what's called an article, which does the same thing as a section. So you can use this as a special kind of div. Think of section articles like a newspaper. In a newspaper, you would have multiple sections, and inside those sections you'd have articles, but you don't have to use them that way. You can use articles and then have sections inside of them. So you can do all sorts of things with semantic HTML5. Again, maybe your newspaper is divided into sections, and then your sections are divided into articles, or you just have a big article with sections inside of those articles. We'll delete these for now. Save this. Let's go back to the browser and see what it looks like. So if we refresh this, now we have a link that's clickable. Well, it's clickable, doesn't go anywhere yet, but it's still clickable. Let's go back to Atom and keep working. Eventually, we're going to add 2 more sections because in our mockup, we had 2 more sections where it had a picture and a heading and some text. So we'll do that later, but for now, we're going to move on to something else. Very often, you'll make changes to your mockup and add things or take things out. So I'm going to add something to my mockup, at least into the code itself. I'm going to add 1 more div in between the projects div and the newsletter div. It's going to call it div class. We'll call it extra. Again, we're going to close this div right away. And we're going to put some extra things in here. So one extra thing in HTML is called a block quote. This is what you would use for something like a pull quote that you would use in some kind of print collateral. Don't forget to close this. Let's just put a little bit of lorem ipsum in there for now, so that we have an extra block called extra, so an extra div here. So let's save this. If you're using a Mac, very simple to use Command S. I'm going to go back to our Chrome browser, refresh, and you see here is that lorem ipsum. Since it's a block quote, oftentimes it's indented. We can add some style to this later, but right now, this is what we have. Again, H1, H2, IMG, H3, a paragraph, a link, and a block quote.